So I'm going to tell you two stories today. One is about Dr. Rachel Lloyd and really what her role is and why she was so important to the University of Nebraska and to the United States. And then talk about the Avery Hall time capsule, which turns out to be one of the best time capsules that has ever been prepared, and it's about chemistry. So this is a whole talk about chemistry in the popular imagination. And I do also want to point out in the year 2020 is the 125th anniversary of the Nebraska local section of the American Chemical Society. And one of the signers of this document, or not signers, but one of the original founders was Rachel Lloyd. And she was important for us forming the local section. And when we were formed back then, we had two female members who were the founders. And we were like one of the only sections with female members, let alone helped found the section. And so again, she's important to Nebraska. And in 2014, the American Chemical Society awarded her status as a National Historic Chemical Landmark. And again, this was a very important moment. It said, here is a very significant chemical event in Nebraska. Turns out to be a person. And there are only 6 landmarks that are actually people. George Washington Carver is another one. So she's up there with the luminaries, and they recognized she had 2 important roles to play. One was she helped start the sugar beet industry in Nebraska, and so connection to economic development. And she spurred many young women to get degrees in chemistry. And she changed how Nebraska, or she was at the beginning here, helping make sure that women got chemistry degrees. And so I wanted to start to give you a sense of what did the people of Nebraska think about Dr. Rachel Lloyd when she was at the university. And I chose a quote from Nebraska's most famous author, Willa Cather, when she was an undergraduate, and she was the editor of the Hesperian, the student newspaper. And she said, "Lloyd has seen developed largely by her own efforts and under her eye, one of the largest chemical laboratories in the West. She has seen her lecture rooms crowded by enthusiastic students of all courses and departments. She is one of those instructors who stand not only for a science or a language, but for ideals and all higher culture." Now that is a great quote, right? And so one message you should receive from this, if you want somebody to write a bio of you, choose an author, right? Because they are going to have great words. But it does say, what's not really said here, is that Willa Cather, when she came to the university, she wanted to be a doctor. And she enrolled in chemistry. And I believe she had the chemistry course from Dr. Rachel Lloyd, her introductory chemistry course. But then she switched to writing. So again, there's a lot of enthusiasm here. And when Willa wrote this, this was right when Dr. Lloyd was leaving the university. So let me start when Rachel Lloyd started doing chemistry. What was her first impact in chemistry? And the moment here is 1874. So this is after the Civil War. This is after the economic collapse that followed the end of the Civil War. And what that meant, there's a couple things going on here. She had been married. She had 2 children. Her 2 children died. Her husband died. He had left her lots of money. He was a chemist. He had left her $6,000. She did traveling to Europe. She taught Sunday school for a number of years. And then the economic collapse meant she had no money. She had to get a job. But her husband had taught her chemistry in the lab that he had built in their home. And she loved that. And so she ended up working at the Chestnut Street Female Seminary in Philadelphia, which was one of the leading boarding schools for women. It had a lot of girls from the Northeast, but also from the South. And she started teaching them chemistry. And again, this is believed to be the first time that girls were taught chemistry laboratory experiments. And that's a hard thing to prove because there's a lot of unpublished data, right? But this is the earliest one that anybody's ever discovered. And you can see from the census that she is a widowed 40-year-old school teacher. And here she's innovating. She is changing the experience of learning for girls. And every summer, she would go up to Cambridge, Massachusetts to attend the Harvard Summer Short Course in Chemistry. And over the years, she ended up publishing 3 papers with the instructor, Charles Mabry. And these are on organic synthesis. And what this meant, this first one meant, she was the first American woman to publish chemical research. Okay? So now, not only did her husband teach her lots of chemistry, she has now gotten formal training, and she's done research, and she's published it. She has now more credentials than your average chemistry professor at any university at this time. Okay. And we have in our department one of the books that she signed. It's in my office. I'll let you look at it if you stop by. So she applied to Bryn Mawr. Bryn Mawr was going to be a women's college. It is a women's college, run by the Friends Society. And they said they would accept applications from females for the professor positions. She applied. She had great letters. She had Charles Maybury saying she is like the most brilliant student I've ever had, and we published papers together. They said they would not hire her because she did not have a degree. She didn't even have a high school degree. So she learned German, and she took a sailing ship to Zurich, where she did research for a year and a half. This is organic research again, under Victor Merz. He accepted a female in his lab, and University of Zurich was the only university in the world that would accept females earning STEM degrees. And so here we are, 1887, and Hudson Nicholson, who was at the University of Nebraska and the chair and only professor of chemistry, he had convinced the university to build the second building on campus called the Chemical Laboratory, and he had attended twice the Harvard Summer Short Course in Chemistry. He had obviously met Rachel Lloyd. It was a small 20 number of people in the class, and he knew how charming she was, and he was keeping track of her. So he said, we want to hire you to join our university. And when she accepted, she became the first woman to become a chemistry professor at a research university in the world. All right. So here's the beautiful building. Here's a bay window. That's Hudson's office. Here's his lab space. Rachel was down on the second floor, and she had to walk down the hall to get to her research space. And hers was used, I'm sure, and his was not. And also in our department, we have these saccharometers. And these saccharometers date pretty early, although, this should be 89, sorry. Right, perfect timing for Rachel Lloyd to be using these things. So again, these are the oldest research devices in our department, instruments, and they're on display in the chemistry department. The way they work, there's a bit of tar in one end, there's air in them, and then there's a piece of paper with some lines on it. If you have a solution, and it's got a specific concentration of sugar in it, sucrose, it'll float. And then wherever the top of the solution hits, you read off that Brix number, and then you could refer to a chart, and it'll tell you the percent sugar that was in that solution. So pretty simple procedure for determining the sugar content of stuff. And what they were up to was sugar beet agriculture. The argument that Hudson Nicholson made was we can enhance the economics of the state by creating agricultural industry. And one of the agricultural industries that generates the most money is making sugar. Now, this is also the same time that the United States wanted to get away from importing French and German sugar. There wasn't enough sugar being made in the United States. So, and he felt the soil in Nebraska was similar to the soil that's being used in Europe to grow the sugar beets. So she would do a vertical cut through the beet, a core, and then she'd smash that up, get rid of the solids, and then float that saccharometer in there to determine the percent sucrose. But then she would do other things, right? Determine, is that representative of the average sugar content of the beets? One thing that they were always looking for was that the average percentage is greater than 12%, because that at the time was determined to be the cutoff point. If it was less than 12% sucrose in the beet, it's not economically viable. If it's more, and you can see these are two really good ones here, then you're going to have a good crop. And each year, they would publish in the Experiment Station Bulletin the results. That is Hudson Nicholson and Rachel Lloyd. And this first one was an analysis of the beets grown in Grand Island. So a number of German immigrants had settled around Grand Island, and they really spurred the university to help hire somebody at the university to measure the sucrose content of the beets when they're freshly harvested, rather than putting them on a train and shipping them to Washington, D.C. And so the results then, 1890, they knew they had an incredibly viable crop, and I'll talk about that in a second. Second year, there was an analysis of beets grown across the state, and I'll show you the map, and then a second season of growing beets across the state. So what do we got here? Oh, she also did this chemical reaction. The sucrose is fructose connected to glucose, but you can also measure the free sugars. So glucose is a reducing sugar. And if you add some copper, which is blue-colored solution, it'll form copper oxide, which is a red solid. You can then centrifuge down and collect the solid, and the grams of the copper oxide is proportional to the moles or the grams of the glucose. And she would do that for each of them as well. So the business community in Grand Island was able to negotiate with the nation's best beet sugar capitalists. They had built 2 plants in California by this time, and then the nation's 4th plant was built in Grand Island. By the time this was done, 2 of the plants in California had already shut down. So this is really the second operating one. And this plant lasted from 1891 to the 1960s. That is a long time, and that really influenced the whole Grand Island area. So this is the map they published in the Experiment Station Bulletin. You can see here's the location of Grand Island. Where is Lincoln? Lincoln is here. And that was 1 year after she determined a viable sucrose content, and then published this map. The bigger the circle, the greater the sucrose content in the beets grown in that area. And you can see there's big circles everywhere. There was beet sugar mania in Nebraska. So Norfolk built a plant, Fremont built a plant. I mean, we're talking major mania going on here. And the problem was, in the late 90s, early 00s, it rained a lot in eastern Nebraska, and that's not good if you've got a soil crop. And so they actually dismantled both those plants and rebuilt them. One of them was rebuilt in Scottsbluff in 1910, and that one is still operating. So again, to show you that the sugar beet thing is huge, in the student yearbook from 1892, you see this cartoon, which blew my mind when I saw this, right? So this is Rachel Lloyd and Hudson Nicholson, and then 2 graduate students turning a crank, beets into sugar. I love that. And it wasn't just the university. So the state fair pass, right? Our industries, right? You got all the animals and the corn, but you've got a beet. This is how big this was. And then let me tell you just a little bit more about Rachel Lloyd. She joined a lot of different clubs. She believed in collaborating with people, but it's also, that's what you do when you're like the only woman scientist, right? You got to talk to somebody else. It doesn't matter if they're men or whatever. You're going to have some people. So, but it is interesting, in this list that I've got of all the groups that I know she joined, the very first one she joined when she was at the female seminary in Philadelphia at the nation's centennial. And it is advancing women, right, professional women. And then late in her time at Nebraska, she joined the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Again, this reminds me, this is the centennial of women's suffrage this year. And but there are 2 chemical ones, right? The American Chemistry Society, she was the second woman. It was 1891, the sugar beet year, right? And then she helped found the Nebraska local section. And how important was it that Nebraska had the second female member of the American Chemical Society? Well, I'm showing you the first 5 women, and there's a pattern here, right? One of these is not like the other. So Rachel Bodley taught chemistry at the Philadelphia Women's Medical College, and she was very important in the Philadelphia area. She's the one who suggested a meeting of chemists at Joseph Priestley's house in upstate Pennsylvania to talk about chemistry. And they all enjoyed that meeting. And then a couple months later, one of the guys said, they were all from New York City, said, let's form the American Chemical Society. And everybody who was at that meeting is a member. Okay, so she was a member just because she was at that first meeting, but she's the one who suggested the meeting as well. By 1891, when they accepted Dr. Rachel Lloyd, and she was a doctor, and she knew more chemistry, she was better published than most people in the American Chemical Society, so they had to accept her, really. By this time, Rachel Bodley had quit the American Chemical Society because there was such misogyny at all the meetings. And there's a famous misogynist dinner song that you can find online, which is stupidly embarrassing. And this member, Mary Fossler, what you're going to see is that she's responsible for making the time capsule. And so here we are, founding the Nebraska local section, and I've been the chair of the local section. We have the current chair of the local section here. So warms my heart to see this. And it was thinking about her and her role and having this picture, and you can see this is the picture from the yearbook. This was the only picture that we had at the time. And Marinda Wu, the president of the American Chemical Society, was at Nebraska, I can't remember what, 2013 or something. And then she saw this picture hanging in our faculty room, and she just couldn't believe it. She had not heard about this woman. And I've been trying so hard to get Nebraskans to think about this. And she said, well, you know, you should apply for a National Historic Chemical Landmark. So that started me on that. But I knew I wanted a better picture than this. This is not a good picture. So one thing, if you do history research, is you go on all kinds of crazy databases and you type in your search terms, and random stuff comes up. And so on the newspapers.com, I found a book published by Rachel Lloyd's brother-in-law, Clement Lloyd, and it said there's a beautifully engraved portrait of the late Professor Lloyd on the initial page, and then amazingly they put this engraving in there. So there's a newspaper version of the photo. So what I worried about, I wanted a different photo. I've been looking for all kinds of photos of Rachel Lloyd, and here it looked like this was going to be the same photo, which was disappointing, but I still wanted to see this biography because this is the first time I'd ever heard about this biography. How could I have been studying her for 20 years and not heard about a biography? So I looked at all these libraries, U.S. Library of Congress. Nobody had a copy of this book. University of Nebraska Library did not have a copy of this book. Okay, totally, absolutely disturbing. How come nobody knows about this book? Then, also, typing on NebraskaNewspapers.com, found the Red Cloud Chief. The cornerstone was being laid for what became Avery Hall. And it said that there's a photograph of Chancellor Avery, Professor Nicholson, the first head of the department, Professor Rachel Lloyd, the second head. So she turns out not only was she the first woman at a research university in chemistry, she was the first chair of a department in chemistry, right? But a photograph. There's a photograph in this time capsule. So I got my camera. I went out to Avery Hall. I looked for the cornerstone, and I took a picture of it. And then I said to everybody, we got to cut this thing open, right? We got to get our chisels. And it took me 2 years, but I finally got permission, and I got the money to remove that time capsule and replace it. And that was a totally fun day. And you can go see that video. So let me tell you what was in the time capsule. So again, this was like the most amazing time capsule. I've done a lot of study on time capsules. This is the best one. And it turns out this white book was in the middle. And that's the thing that had Rachel Lloyd's picture in it. But look at the stacking here. There's really thought that had gone in to what you put in a time capsule. So you're going to start with a newspaper, because the newspapers are going to tell you what day this was sealed up. And it's going to tell you what was going on at the time. And what was going on at the time, this was 1 year before the United States entered World War I. There's all kinds of talk about what's going on in Europe and why we should participate. The second layer, there are objects, the College of Pharmacy, Bulletin for the University, that are related to, it says, now you're entering the university. Okay? It's not just the world, we're at the university. There are also these envelopes, and they had fibers that are stained with different dyes. This says the colors of the Nebraska section, American Chemical Society, eosin pink and malachite green. So then I had to go online and find out what those are. And you can see bright pink and bright green. And I want to point out my outfit today. I have not opened any of these envelopes. They're still unopened. Then, chemical abstracts, that describes research summaries, and it's been going on a long time. It was fairly new at this moment. And then in there were some organic chemistry exams, which are all about dyes, it turns out. And dyes were totally important to the beginning of organic chemistry. Next, we have this picture of Hudson Nicholson taking up an entire layer of its own. And he was the guy. And then this white book. So my wife Marjorie and I were both looking through all the materials, taking it out piece by piece, taking notes. Saw that white book and I said, wait a second. If my life is amazing, this is Clement Lloyd's book. And I didn't know what to think. So looking at this book later, you can see there's a number on the top. That looks like a catalog number. And this embossing, it says University of Nebraska Library, Lincoln. Somebody had taken the University of Nebraska copy and put it in the time capsule and sealed it. And then the library eventually got rid of the card because the book was missing, right, and you couldn't replace it. And so I never found it. In the book were some pictures. And so here's Mary Fossler again. Again, she's the one, I believe, who put it together. Those were her organic chemistry labs. She was the one in the College of Pharmacy. Sam Avery was an undergraduate, as was Mary Fossler at the same time, when Rachel Lloyd was here. But by this time, he was chancellor. So then below this book were the chemicals. And this is what I worried about the most. This is what gave me the leverage to open up the time capsule because it said there are chemicals in the time capsule. And I worried they had dissolved whatever was in there. And they're all wrapped in this nice paper, but you can see that there's some chemical eating away of these papers. And if you look at the labels here, and there's many more chemicals, you can get some idea of the type of people who had put the objects in there. These are all graduate students, and there's 2 undergrads. A lot of it relating to dyes. One of my favorite objects in there, way less than the white book, is this little brick. It's about this big. It's by the first PhD person in the department. And it says, one of the sample bricks made during my investigation of Nebraska clays, 1912 to 1916. This clay came from the property of John Show, Takema, Nebraska, by George Barrowman. So then Marjorie and I, we got in a car the next weekend. We went up to Takema. We looked for this clay field. It's all gone. So it's a depressed field, and there's now corn on it. But we could find where it had been, which was totally fun. Below that was this book, organic chemistry textbook. And when I look at this, I see this fungus on here. It's signed by Mary Fossler. And this reminds me to tell you that when we opened the time capsule, it had a unique smell, or unique odor. And the newspapers certainly were decaying, and when we took those out, the smell went down a little bit. But it got stronger as we got to the chemicals, took the chemicals out, and then it was really powerful because there's a lot of fungus on this, right? So my lungs are probably toast at this point. Then right below that book was this list of faculty who'd been in the department and graduate students. On the very bottom was this letter from the fellow who actually built Avery Hall, and then the university guy who was in charge of making sure that this guy did what he was supposed to do. So that's an overview of all the stuff that's in there. Let me just tell you a little bit about the book. So totally exciting, right? In memoriam, talking about Rachel Lloyd, PhD from Zurich, by Clement Lloyd, her husband's brother. And it turns out they had met at school. And he published this a few months after she died. And it is an amazing book. There are things in this book that I did not know about her life that helped me really understand what she had done and what she meant. But this is the photo that was in the book, in the frontispiece. And that's a gorgeous, gorgeous photo. I just can hardly stand it. So you can see her hair. It's in a little net. You can see this brooch. You can see her silk dress has some pattern on it. So I gave the book to UNL Archives. Andy Jewell did the digital humanities version of it. It's now available for anybody to read. And Just want to show you how good that photo was. So it made me feel good that I found this great photo of her. And that's just to impress upon you how good that photo is. Look at that, huh? Let's just focus on the eyes. Look at that. That's amazing. And so with that, I am done.
Were there other records of the time capsule? I mean, if you had not found this reference in the new, unexpectedly in some, what was it, Red Cloud newspaper?
Red Cloud Chief from Red Cloud, Nebraska.
I mean, did anybody know, or were there any records of this time capsule anywhere?
And so I found that in 2012, that newspaper article, and I have certainly searched since then for other mentions of it, and the answer is there are none.
So nobody at the university knew that this thing, this time capsule?
No university publication and no Lincoln newspapers. I've specifically gone through each newspaper on that day or a couple days after, and nothing. They're the only ones that reported on it.
Where are there other time capsules?
Yeah. Well, now it makes me think any cornerstone that has a date on it, you've got to open that thing, truly. There's something in there.
I got two other questions, actually. Surprise. First, Professor, you didn't mention that you nominated Rachel Lloyd for the Nebraska Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I did.
She's very worthy of it for her contributions, Nebraska economics, crops and such. Very big impact on the state. So I think, thank you on behalf of we amateur historians who appreciate that.
Yep, so we did pretty well. We didn't rise to the top, right? And then now they're doing every 7 years. So I've got like 3 more years before I can do it again.
Sorry, one more question. I have all sorts of questions. Recently I saw a nice show on the American Experience about Dr. Harvey Wiley.
Okay. Yep.
And I'm just wondering if there's any connection between Rachel Lloyd and Harvey Wiley. Perhaps even on the suffragette movement, because Wiley's wife was big in that.
Oh,
but
wow.
he was basically the father of the FDA, and did all sorts of.
Yep.
Was a leading chemical pioneer.
Yep. So yeah, no, I don't know of any connection, but I can tell you that he did hire female scientists to work for him, and I can also tell you that a number of the female chemistry graduates from the University of Nebraska ended up working for the USDA Chemistry Department. So it is very big in the history of our department. We are a big feeder to them. And that's the value of governments, right? They should be more impartial. Should be.
Great, thank you. I really enjoyed this talk. So I was wondering if you could speak more about her influence on women in science. Have you been following up on the students that she's trained and where they went in their careers? I noticed there are a number of women PhD students in the time capsule as well.
Yeah, so I have. So we have there are about 1,000 students, I believe, since the beginning of the department have earned master's thesis or PhD. And today, it's just normal on the first page to list who your advisor was. And so you could go back, and I've got the list going all the way back. And what you find out is that the first 25 or so don't say who the advisor was. So you got to guess. But back then, it was more the approach to the ownership of the student on the idea was the student came up with the idea, and you helped them do that project. So it was more on them, right? And everybody was advising them. So you could interpret it that way. But so what I want to claim is that the first 15 or so were both Nicholson and Lloyd. And that's the way I record it in my notes with a little asterisk. And so you follow those first 15, and they are amazing. And there were about 1/3 females. And they were all earning master's degrees. We didn't have a PhD again until 1916, much longer after she was gone. And what I didn't tell you was that 1 year before she retired, she suffered a stroke down her left arm while on a vacation at the Black Hills. And she came back and she thought she would have to quit because she couldn't do anything. To make sure that she didn't quit, she was assigned a very promising undergraduate named Mary Fossler. And so Mary Fossler were her arms. And then what is totally amazing about Rachel Lloyd is that, okay, yes, she came back, but then all of a sudden she says, I'm going to create a course in the history of chemistry that I'm going to teach in the spring. So not only did she not, she was doing everything, she was doing even more, right? So Mary Fossler actually is really important in the history of our department. And I had that list of the students' stuff. And if I can get back to that, whoops, there we go. I've listed the one here that was Fossler's student. Ruth OBrien is one of the females who went to the USDA Chemistry Department. And she played a big role there. There's another woman whose name is not here, who ended up doing textiles and clothing during the Depression. And she played a very big role at leading the reuse of materials.
All right, thank you.
So just curious, what were the chemicals in the bottles, and are they still things that are relevant?
Yeah. So what Fossler would do in her organic chemistry lab was everybody was supposed to synthesize something new. Okay? And what that meant was you take a dye that's known, and you mix it with some metal, and you're going to create some different aggregate. And then they also did study the fastness, right? How long, if you shine light on it, does it last? Does it stay in the fiber when you wash it? That sort of thing. And in fact, two of her students in the UNL archives, they've got little pieces of stained fibers that are in their theses. It's amazing. These things are really thick. But I think this one is iron aliserate. So it's this molecule with iron atoms in it. And so it's a dye. Here's chromic aliserate. Here is alizarin. This says cerium rare fraction. So cerium is an element, and the rare elements are really popular today. They're the high-tech elements, right? Yttrium is a important element today. But we had somebody at the university who was studying the rare earths, and so a lot of them are doing that. And then I think this says synthetic indigo, and this also says ferric aliserate. So a lot of dyes, but there's also lots of stuff related to rare earths.
My second question is, first of all, do you know of any other time capsules on campus? And also, do you have any plans for making a time capsule in the future?
Yeah. So let me answer the second question. So when we removed this time capsule, somebody suggested, well, you should make a new one and replace it, right? And this is like this is one of the things that I was really bad at disseminating, that is getting the word out, that I actually put a new one in there. Oh. And what I did was all the departments who had ever been in Avery Hall, I asked them to donate something for this time capsule. And I bought a ceramic container that wouldn't decay. The one that was in there had decayed. And so everybody was very thoughtful. I said no newspapers, no rubber, that kind of thing. And so I've got a list somewhere of what's in there, but it's really fun. So that does provoke the thought, what should you put in a time capsule, right? And how do you want to be remembered? Because time capsules are unique time travel devices. What you're doing is you're thinking, okay, here I am today. I'm going to put something in here that's about today, but also about the past. Who I think I am, that I know is going to be opened by somebody way in the future. And there's no rules about when you can open time capsules. Now, I think on some people, their expectation is when the building is destroyed, then somebody will find the time capsule and then it'll just be this random discovery, right? That's not that satisfying to me. There should be time dating of time capsules. And the first question was?
Are there other time capsules on campus?
On campus, yes. There are. And so I have read about old buildings being torn down. And again, it is the random discovery. Oh, my goodness, there was a time capsule in there. But there hasn't been that much interesting in it. And so that's one of the famous things about time capsules. You type that in, History of Time Capsules. There's 2 books over here. People are not thoughtful about what to put in them. The most common things you'll find is a newspaper on top, maybe a list of the people who work there, and a coin. That's it. There's so many time capsules that are just that. Probably the most interesting one I've ever read of, I think it was Northwestern University, was building a new biology building. And what they did was they took some agar and they stabbed it with different microbes, and they put it in the time capsule. Whoa! That's going to keep anybody from opening that thing up.
Mark, you mentioned the envelopes
Yeah,
that you haven't opened.
yeah.
What do you expect to find?
Just
Are you
fiber.
going to open them?
Just fibers. There are other things that I haven't opened, like this round bottom flask with a cork in it. There's a little note here. All I'd have to do is pull it off and pull that little piece of paper out. I want to know what's on that piece of paper, but there hasn't been a moment, right? We need to create a moment where we look at this piece of paper. I also have not looked at there's something in one of these little tubes. And then I've got a sealed tube, obviously an example of a student's ability to do glass blowing. But there's something in there, and you have to break it. And I do not want to be that person. But I've got those 5 envelopes on display on the 2nd floor of Hamilton Hall.
Nicholson brought Lloyd
Yeah.
to Nebraska.
Yeah.
Did she have any other connections with Nebraska at all besides him? And when she left Nebraska, did she maintain connections, or what happened to her Nebraska
Right.
connection?
So I only know that she knew Hudson, and Hudson had been a science teacher. He'd been trained to be a teacher, but he ended up going to Peru Normal School, teaching there. We hired him at University of Nebraska, and as the chair of chemistry and physics, even though he didn't really know that much about chemistry or physics. And he quickly hired Rachel Lloyd and DeWitt Brace, which were 2 genius hires, right? And then, so that he knew more chemistry, that's why he was attending the Harvard Summer Short Course. That's probably the most chemistry training he ever had. And that's how he met Rachel Lloyd. People loved her everywhere she went. People followed her story. Her story was published in newspapers all the time. Just all kinds of examples. But she maintained her status with the Nebraska local section for 2 years after she left, and then let it lapse. And I know there were newspaper articles published in the Lincoln paper years after she was gone, what's going on with Rachel Lloyd. But that's about all.